Now, quadratics are not the only type of functions that we can factor. We can actually factor cubic functions. Okay. Cubic functions can have at most 4 terms. So how can we factor this cubic function? We're going to factor it by a method called grouping. When we use the grouping method, we're going to group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms together and factor those separately, just as such. When we group them like this, we're going to be looking for things like a GCF. Remember, GCF stands for greatest common factor. What are the numbers or the variables that these 2 groups have in common? You'll factor those out and we'll continue on with the process. So let's look at an example. Let's look at 64x cubed plus 40x squared minus 56x minus 35. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to group the first 2 and the last 2 sets of terms together. So I have to ask myself, what is the biggest number that can go both into 64 and into 40? Hopefully we've all agreed that 8 is that largest number. So I'm going to pull an 8 out. Out of the variables, what's the largest group of variables I could take out? An x squared. So when I do that, I need to write what is left inside parentheses. 8 times 8 is 64, and I'm going to include an x. And then 8 times 5 is 40, and the x squared will stay with it after we multiply it out. Now let's look at my second group. What is in common between 56 and 35? We're going to take the negative 7. We want to take that negative because we want this first term in our factor to be positive. Notice there's not enough x values to pull from, so I'm going to start writing my next factor. Negative 7 goes into 56 8 times, and I'm going to leave that. Negative 7 goes into negative 35 a positive 5 times. So what do we notice when this happens? What you should notice is that these 2 factors match up. And that's how we know we're doing our job correctly. Because we only need 2 things to be factors to multiply. So I'm going to write these 2 factors down. My first factor is 8x squared minus 7. And that's going to be multiplied by this 8x plus 5. Now we can double check our work quickly. We know 8 times 8 is 64. That's what we started with. And x squared times x is x cubed. That's a good start. And negative 7 and 5 do get me a negative 35. As long as my first and my last match up, it's usually following that the middles will be the same. Let's try another example. Let's try 6x cubed minus 18x squared plus 7x minus 21. This is a cubic function, so we will factor by grouping. I'm going to group the first 2 and the last 2 together. Now let's ask ourselves, what is the greatest common factor between 6 and 18? Should be 6. And we'll take out an x squared. So what's left? there should be an x, because 6x squared times x is 6x cubed. And 6 times a negative 3 will get me that negative 18 back. Let's try the same method for the second group of terms. The biggest number in common, the GCF, is going to be a positive 7. That positive 7 is going to leave me with an x and a negative 3. Remember, our goal is to get two of these factors the same, because they'll just morph into that one. We'll cancel one out. So my final answer is going to be 6x squared plus 7 times x minus 3. And this has been a review of factoring by grouping.